Лютерии переворот, то что в Йорде восстание. Никакой уверенности в завтрашнем дне. То в Лютерии переворот, то что в Йорде восстание. Никакой уверенности в завтрашнем дне.
И не говори.
Говорят, порталы в гавани барахлят. Вроде как...
Перед вами свет Арктуса. Главная достопримечательность Айзендельфа.
Какой забавный у тебя шлем. Какой забавный у тебя.
Осторожно, хрупкий
Какой забавный у тебя шлем.
Осторожно, хрупкий груз! Осторожно, хрупкий груз! Осторожно, хрупкий груз! Осторожно, хрупкий груз!
У нас принято давать имена молотам. А чем кирки?
Поскорей бы обед.
А помните, одно время в моде были золотые цепочки?
Помню, конечно, я их столько выковал, что не счесть.
А я себе с тех заказов шубку прикупила.
Поскорей бы обед.
У нас принято давать имена молотом.
Кувырок, янтарь! Кувырок! Я кудри накрутила. Никак не могу решить.
Если закажете доспехи для всей семьи, мы вам скидку сделаем. Мы даже для младенцев латные чепчики куем. Если закажете доспехи для всей семьи, мы вам скидку сделаем. Мы даже для младенцев латные чепчики куем. Если закажете доспехи для всей семьи, мы вам скидку сделаем. Мы даже для младенцев латные чепчики куем.
Никак не могу решить. Я кудри накрутила, а ты даже не за янтарь.
Осторожно, хрупкий!
Возьму на себя.
Слушай сюда, молоко.
Что могу сказать? Неплохо, Умар.
А у вас есть аншуйские марки? Я их коллекционирую. А у вас есть аншуйские марки? Я их коллекционирую.
Что могу сказать? Неплохо, Умар.
Во что лучше вложить?
Слушай сюда, малохор.
вами свет
Какой
Арктуса.
забавный у тебя шлем. Кувырок, янтарь! Кувырок! янтарь! Кувырок!
из
Говорят, порталы в
литерийской
гавани
делегации?
барахлят.
Тогда
Вроде как
добро
один
пожаловать.
артефакт без вести пропал.
But I didn't know if it was one of those seminal games up to the standard or up to the echelon of a lot of the games that we've already tackled. You know, we talked about Resident Evil 2, BioShock, The Last of Us, Batman Arkham Asylum, some really amazing games, arguably some of the best games in the last decade. I knew this one was up there, but I didn't know if it was as far up there as not or not. I thought it was a little more polarizing. You know, I was looking at different people, different outlets rated it in their PS3 game rankings all time. And it jumped from number 47, usually in people's top 50. But it jumped from 47 all the way up to, I think, IGN's number 16 PS3 game of all time. So just in that, it was a little more polarizing. An epic game, certainly one of the greater games that have come out in the last decade, I would argue. But maybe not up there with like The Last of Us or Red Dead Redemption or, that type of thing. So, and I was pleasantly surprised by it because I thought this one might come in as a little more of a generic entry, maybe not up to that level of quality of those other seminal games. But I was really surprised by it. I really enjoyed it. I think I wanted to do another first-person shooter, and I thought it would be a little more, a little less story-centered and a little more popcorny of an entry, a little more of just a, shoot 'em up, shoot and kill, a little more of a thoughtless type thing. And I was really pleasantly surprised that this game is definitely not that. It became something more than that. So I was really interested to play it and just have my own experience with it and hearing most people really like this game, but just in hearing and just something that may be a little more of a sophomoric entry rather than something that's held up as like one of the best. But I really, I have to say, just as a spoiler alert, I really enjoyed this game just as much as those BioShocks and Last of Us and Resident Evil Remake. I enjoyed this game very much, just as much as I did those other games. And I think there's a lot to talk about because I think this game is one thing on its face and another thing when you get deep into it. And that's the other thing. It's a somewhat long game. It was a pretty long game for me because I'm so methodical with the games I play. And I think this game sort of has a really neat evolution. Now, I'm not as steeped in modern games as you are, Kyle, or a lot of our listeners are, but for me, just for my context, I think this game has an evolution that in-game that I've never really experienced before. This game really becomes something, I think it starts as something and becomes something else in time. And I think there's just so much to talk about with this game. And I had a blast with it, thank goodness. So I think there's a lot of joyful praise that I want to sort of heap on it. But I think there's a lot to say. I think there's really a lot to say about this game. And I want to channel your experiences, Kyle, from, going 7-8 years ago and just get what, our listener feedback as well and see how it holds up. See how it holds up to you, because to me it held up really well, but I'm holding it up to a lot less of a library of games. A much more limited space of games I'm holding it up to. But yeah, I really dug it, man. I really, really enjoyed myself with this game.
Yeah, so I think a good way to set this up is I'll get into some of my memories of it and where the game came from to begin with. But as everyone out there knows, I think you could support us on Patreon. As I said earlier, patreon.com/ColinsLastStand, early ad-free access to the show, and all these other perks. One of them is to submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. We have plenty of them for this episode. Tenny Cootie wrote into us and said, Far Cry 3 was a seminal game in my life. I had just moved to a house to a new neighborhood with no internet. and my PS3 disc drive had just died. This meant I can only play Far Cry for 3 months as it was the only game I had downloaded. I actually had to ask my neighbors to use their internet to download the game as our new house's internet hadn't been set up yet and wouldn't be for the next 3 months. When you can only play one game for 3 months, you'd get to know it pretty well, and I was the master of Rook Island for those months. I pretty much ran through that whole game just with the bow and arrow. I think literally being in a new environment in the real world made me more attached to the game for familiarity, and now it represents a special and unique time in my life where it was physically the only thing I can play. It's interesting, Dave, because I said that I really do remember this game coming out, and here's the reason that I remember, because yeah, I play a shit ton of games, they come and go, and what I remember about this is at IGN when I was there in 2012, we did this really interesting thing under our editor-in-chief at the time, Casey Lynch, who works at Crystal Dynamics now, and we did this thing where we invited the developers of what we deemed the 10 best games of the year to IGN, and we did this like live stream and interview them and all that kind of stuff. So it was like the guys that did Denaton, I think is what they're called, the guys that did Hotline Miami, and we had The Unfinished Swan, and we had Journey, and all these other things. I think Dishonored was in there, and Journey ended up winning, and I think that was the right winner. But Far Cry 3 was a game that came out and was on the list, I believe, but came out so late that year. It was actually delayed. It was supposed to come out a little earlier in 2012, and it was delayed, and so it came out in late November, that it really missed the hype train for Game of the Year that year. And I remember Mitch Dyer, who I used to work with, who is now at EA, and he actually was one of the writers on Star Wars Battlefront 2. And he was really evangelizing this game. And I remember I was interested in it, but I kind of blew it off, and I think a lot of people were just blowing this game off because Far Cry wasn't really an established franchise at this time. It existed, and for people that don't know, it actually came out, the original Far Cry actually came out in 2004 on PS2 and on PC and all these others. Well, it came out to PC, and then it was ported to all these other things in the form of the Instinct series and all of that. And then Far Cry 2 came out in October of 2008. But I remember it just came out at this weird time where it was just the calendar kind of did it a disservice in terms of really considering it one of the great games of 2012, but it was. And I think a lot of people don't realize, because this game is so wrapped up with Ubisoft and Ubisoft's internal studios, especially Ubisoft Montreal, which made this game, that the original Far Cry that came out in 2004 was actually a Crytek game. And this is a little factoid that's actually just totally lost to history for a lot of people, but Crytek, who are the studio in Germany and elsewhere that went on to make Crysis in 2007, which was, for people that don't know, at the time considered to be the most beautiful game ever made. It was like you needed like a really, at the time, high-end PC to run Crysis, and Crysis was an open-world first-person shooter. So you can see that Crytek creates Far Cry, the original Far Cry, and then the Instincts games come out. Ubisoft kind of takes over internally. Crytek goes on to make Crysis, and then they make Crysis 2 and Crysis 3. The Crysis at the time we're recording this, Crysis Remastered is actually going to come out this summer from Crytek, and they've had a lot of ups and downs. They're probably better known for CryEngine, which is their proprietary engine, than any of their games at this point. But Ubisoft took the game internally, and Far Cry 2 came out in October 2008. And Far Cry 2 was interesting. I only played it a little bit. I was really turned off because I think that for those who haven't played, Far Cry 2 took itself, in terms of its mechanics, a little too seriously. Like, your guns will break and degrade. They jam during gunfights. You can get, like, malaria and all these diseases in the game. It was like a really... It wasn't that fun for me. I know a lot of people like it, but I didn't think it was that fun. And Far Cry 3 was so interesting because Ubisoft Montreal and the powers that be there took all the things that made Far Cry 2 work so well. In some ways, the open worlds, the dynamic weapons, taking over bases and crazy enemies and and incredible violence and all of that, and got rid of all of the fluff that I personally didn't like, the malaria and the gun jamming and degradation. It's actually the same kind of stuff that made, in my mind, Zelda Breath of the Wild less fun than it could have been. The thing that frustrated me so much about that game was the weapon degradation. I was like, this sucks. This isn't fun. This isn't fun at all. You know, like there's a place for that if you're playing like a really realistic survival game or something. But I was so annoyed in Zelda, like when I had this really great weapon and I was afraid to use it because it was going to break. And so they got rid of all that stuff. And so Far Cry 3 comes out in November of 2012 on PS3, 360, and PC, and it does end up blowing people away. And it's still the best-selling Far Cry game. As Dagan said earlier, it is still the best received Far Cry game, although I really personally believe that Far Cry 5 is the best Far Cry game. That's a really divisive statement. I love, the thing is, I fucking love Far Cry, as everyone knows. Starting with Far Cry 3, like, I love these games. I loved Far Cry 4, which came out in 2014. I loved Primal, which was the weird caveman Far Cry that came out in 2016. Far Cry 5 came out in 2018. New Dawn came out in 2019. I love all those games. I think they're all great. So there's a lot to say here about this particular game, but I'm so glad to hear that you received it so well, because it actually is an incredibly influential game. There still aren't very many open world first person shooters, and certainly not very many that feel like this. I mean, all you have to do is go and play a game like Avalanche's Generation Zero, which is horrible, to understand how hard this actually is to pull off this kind of game. And Far Cry 3's genetics are really deeply embedded in a lot of what Ubisoft does now today. A lot of people look at this as maybe the beginning of the so-called Ubisoft formula, the checkbox formula, which I actually really like. A lot of their games play like this. Even if it's not a first-person shooter, they're structured like this. If you look at games like The Division or Watch Dogs or Assassin's Creed, some of these series predate Far Cry 3, including Assassin's Creed, but Far Cry 3 really encapsulates that whole formula. But also, this is a game that is hard to replicate, because not only is it really fun to play, not only is it dynamic, not only is it funny, much like Grand Theft Auto, where a lot of the humor in the game comes from the random shit that happens. But also, it's hard to replicate a game that feels this good, that was this deliberately made, and that I think, based on Jeffrey Yohalim's story, is actually a lot deeper, if you want to get into it, than people give it credit for. Now, I'm not one of these people that have really fallen down the rabbit hole, and I use that term very literally because of the Alice in Wonderland references in the game. But there actually is more than meets the eye here, because it is about dude bros and their hot girlfriends, and they're rich kids from Santa Monica, and they go to these fictional islands, the Rook Islands, in the South Pacific, and where the Indian Ocean kind of merge. And they're having a good time, and they get kidnapped by crazy slavers and pirates and drug dealers and whatever. But there actually is a lot more to it than that. And so I'm really curious, Nick, what about this game sticks out to you the most? What did you enjoy the most about it?
You know what? I mean, I have a list of the elements that I enjoyed the most of the game, but I think this game had everything. I know it gets some degree of criticism for being too easy, but I think it was what I liked about it was that it was relatively simple. It was sort of a long game, or at least I treated it like a long game by being methodical about looting and finding things and side questing and all that kind of thing. But I found it to be, through its easiness, I found it to be accessible, very satisfying, smooth, fluid, and fun. So for a newbie, a relative newbie like me, it was a really great game to jump into, despite the length, because I found it relatively easy to play. But it also, at the same time, in the same breath, it offers a lot. I mean, the game really offers a lot of elements. There's a lot to do. You have action and missions. I like that you were able to sort of break off from the main body of the game and do your side questing. And I liked the combination of overt action and stealth, and the buying and upgrading and the crafting, which directly linked into replenishing your health or enhancing specific abilities. The fact that there were so many vehicles to choose from, and that was a whole sort of almost like it almost reminded me of a GTA type of look and feel to it. The story, when you get into the story and you realize there's a lot more depth and a lot more granularity and it's a lot deeper than it originally appears. And you have a really, we'll get into him, but we have a really irresistible antagonist, a really nice wide variety of weapons that are enhanceable, and that RPG styled leveling that we'll talk about. And just the fact that you're playing, I always love a game that's fueled by your protagonist, or yourself through the protagonist is fueled by revenge. That always really works for me. I always love that in a game. And the hunting and the looting, I just loved. There was so many elements that got you into it. I thought the atmosphere was really beautiful. I thought the atmosphere was really inventive. And again, I love the way this game kind of, for me at least, kind of slowly revealed itself. You start out on a tropical island. Okay, fine. And I think graphically, even, it holds up pretty well. Environmentally, it's an open world. There's some degree of exploration. But they also got very inventive with it. As you get deeper into the game, it's, yes, you're on this tropical island, and it's all those vistas that you would that you would expect to see. You have the palm trees and the blue skies and the clear water and the rocky cliffs and the vegetation and all that kind of stuff. But then you get into the pirate outposts and the villages and the World War II artillery batteries, which were really unexpected at first, and the wrecked aircraft and the looming radio towers and the jungles, and you get into ancient temples and underground bunkers, and it's just a really cool combination of natural, the natural terrain, and then authentically inhabited spaces that feel like a tropical island. I feel like a Caribbean island or something that's akin to that. I know this was inspired by Hawaii and Caribbean chains of islands and pockets of all those things. And I love the atmosphere. I thought it was really cool. I like that whole thing. It really felt like a tropical island. You have those huts and those dwellings with the corrugated steel paneling and the tires and the reclaimed wood, and that's kind of what everything's made out of. But then it gets into like something like Hoyt's compound, which is taken to the next level. I thought it was really inventive visually. I liked being in that setting. It felt realistic, but it also kind of felt fun and exaggerated at the same time. I think that speaks to this game as a whole. I think it has the elements of both of those things. I think it's fun and unbelievable and imaginative, but it's also grounded in reality. And you know what I really loved about this game, Kyle? One of the things that really struck me, if I'm looking at it from like A to Z, is that the whole affair, well, at first it's like, my feeling was, Jesus, like I have to play as and rescue these douchey rich kids. Like these kids are like total douchebags. Like it's like, I don't know if I'm in. And the game just slowly, with the carrot and the stick, just slowly brought me in until, you're feeling like, eventually you're feeling sympathy. These characters get humanized, and you want revenge, and you want to live, and you want your friends to live, and just how you get sucked into the story. And it doesn't mean it stops being campy. There are campy and fun, again, that sort of popcorny element to it, but it's also grounded in really wanting to achieve your goals. And I think for me, a game like this could get really stressful because I know its reputation. I know it's been talked about. I know it's been played over 8 years. People have mastered it. People have explored like every nook and cranny. But for me, again, like that accessibility is important, where I could feel part of it. And I really did. Like, I really felt like this game demanded my attention. I thought the dialogue was really good. Eventually, the story's really well written. I think that the mocap, I mean, I want to talk to you about that. I'm really not a big proponent of mocap, but the mocap is employed to such great effect in this game. The acting and even the emoting, even like the small facial stuff, is quite good. There's a really nice amount of nuance, and that draws you in, especially with some of the characters like Voss, later on Hoyt. I'm a big fan of the character that I think deserves a little more shine in the game, Buck. He's a legitimately creepy character. So I thought that there was so many things that I found joyful and I was joyfully surprised about in this game. Graphically, from the graphics to the gameplay to the acting to the story. The way this game sort of slowly buys you off. It sort of buys your sympathies. It brings you into the game. You realize it's not just going to be a first-person shoot 'em up. That the game gets under your skin a little bit somehow. But I think at the same time it retains that level of fun, and it sort of walks the line so perfectly. And I haven't played a game like that yet. I haven't. Either a game is really deep, like The Last of Us. I would say even a game that we've played like Dead Space, where it's really deep and dire and dark, and it's engrossing, but in a different way. I think this also retained its fun elements, and maybe that's because they made it so you could split off from the action pretty easily. It didn't get stressed. Again, that accessibility, it didn't get stressful for me. If I wanted to go hunt for animals or craft rucksacks or do just loot enemies or go loot for chests or explore a part of the jungle that I haven't been to yet, you could do that. And I kind of like the fact that you have your main mission, but you could split off. For me, it really made it an enjoyable. Again, I didn't feel stressed out by this game that I know everybody played already. everybody knew so well. It's like I felt really like it was for me too. I felt like it was for a newbie too, and I think that's what made it so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. I mean, there's a lot in there because I think the game's cliche nature, in terms of its aesthetic, hides something that, like I said, could be deeper if you want it to be. And I also think that the bright colors of these fictional Rook Islands, the tropical setting, which are basically split into a small archipelago of 2 main islands, I think that it even though there's a day-night cycle, so not everything is always bright and blue and green and all of that, it's just that the brightness of the game really contrasts with the incredible violence and dark nature of this island. Because what's really happening on this island is that the Rakyat, the natives, are basically being subjugated slowly by slavers and illicit sex traders and drug traders and all this kind of stuff. And all this screwed up shit is happening on this island. And so it creates a really nice contrast between the subject matter, the actions of the game. I know that a lot of people talk about Far Cry 2, especially as being kind of a commentary on violence. And that violence is here too. This is an incredibly violent game. And so when you take into account like the dude bro, douchey, rich characters like Jason Brody and his brother Riley, you have Lisa, Keith, Oliver, Daisy, none of them really matter, with the exception of course, Jason's performance. And it's funny because when I remember playing the game originally and I was like, is that Nolan North doing Jason's voice? Because it sounds like him. It's not actually, though. It's this guy named Gianpaolo Ventura, who hasn't really done very much. If you read his IMDb, actually, he's not like an incredibly active voice actor. He does some TV and some movies, and he's been in a few things, but Far Cry 3 was actually like his most notable gaming role. And so I really dig just the various, like you said, verticals. This game, to me, has the perfect amount of content without being overwhelming and without breaking you off of the story and the main narrative too much, because I often criticize on Sacred Symbols. I think it depends on the game, the genre, the intent, but I criticize games pretty often for having too much content, because I think that we're starting to sacrifice quality and intent for bloat in video games. But this was 8 years ago when we were recording this, 7.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And we weren't really quite suffering under the yoke of using time as currency yet, where people are like, well, if the game's not 50 hours, I'm not that interested in it. And I'm like, well, why not? You can play a game like Journey, where everybody's gone to the Rapture or something like that, which takes 2 hours, and get a powerful experience that rivals or surpasses many of these great 50 or 100-hour games that just don't respect your time. And I think Far Cry 3 really threads the needle, because as you said, and I wrote that in my notes, there's this island split north and south. They do a really nice job of creating a natural path from one island to the next. You can't actually go to the southern island until maybe 2/3 of the way through the story, which I think is cool. But it's there. Yeah. You know it's there. You can see it on your map. You can see all of the outposts and radio towers. The hallmark of Far Cry has always been clearing out the outposts, clearing out the radio towers, and doing all that kind of stuff, opening the map up. I fucking love doing that. I love that you can repopulate. And I think you can do it in the original Far Cry 3, but in Far Cry 3 Classic, you can repopulate the outposts once they're empty. So you can just keep doing them over and over again.
That's so cool.
Which is really cool. I love that. So they understand what the hook is. There's the hunting aspect, which ties into the crafting aspect, which ties into the upgrade and the RPG upgrades with the experience points. You get different amount of experience points for killing people in more unique ways, which I think is really cool. As you said, there are side quests like supply drops and the wanted things where you go and kill and do bounties. There's the Path of the Hunter where you go on hunts. There's driving and gliding and parachuting. Driving is probably my least favorite part of the game, simply because I'm really bad at first-person driving. I just can't do it. I know that this is a common thing in driving sims now. I know that some people, I think, prefer to play Gran Turismo and Forza and all that kind of stuff. So there's a situation there where I'm like, that's just a personal preference thing, but it's there. And then there are all of the collectibles. You have the relics, the Letters of the Lost, which ties into a pretty interesting storyline, the laptops, which are also kind of story-driven, and then there's all the many treasures you can find and sell. And then there's, like you said, all the weapons. So it really borders on that borderline, to steal a term from Madonna, where they just go up to that border, and then if they added just anything else to this game, it would have started to detract from it. It's a perfect kind of package from a feature set standpoint. And this actually stands out because we're talking about this more contemporaneously with Ubisoft and how a lot of the Ubisoft games just follow the same formula. It's very rare to find a Ubisoft game that's like Child of Light or Valiant Hearts or even something like Rainbow Six Siege that don't follow the same formula. And it's because it's a formula that really, really works. But you see that with the new Assassin's Creed game that was just announced, Valhalla, which is about 9th century England and the Saxons and the Vikings and the Danes, which is an interesting subject matter that shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom also deal with. So I don't know what's so popular about that. I've been asking myself that recently. Somebody really cares now about the Saxons. But but for me, I look at the reaction to that game and specifically the reaction that people have compared to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is a really famously bloated game that took forever for people to beat. And Ubisoft came out and they said, well, Valhalla's not going to be that big. And immediately people took that as a slight, like, well, we got to have a game as bigger than Odyssey. And it's like, but why? Like, you got to scale back and really refine what the game does well. And I'd rather play a 15 or 20 hour game or a 25 hour game like Far Cry 3 than have my time disrespected. And that's what this game does so well from my point of view.
Sure. Absolutely.
So Dave, talk to me a little bit about the story, the characters. We talked a little bit about Jason Brody. We mentioned Voss and Hoyt already. You did. Talk to me a little bit about the kind of this kind of slate of characters, how they all play into each other, and what you kind of liked or didn't like about the story, because there is a lot of depth here if you want it. I personally actually think that I don't know that I needed to explore all the depth to get everything I wanted out of this game. I'm not playing this game like I'm playing The Last of Us, where I'm like, or Dead Space, where I'm like, I really need the narrative. But it is there. This game has been slighted, I think, a little bit. And again, Jeffrey Yohalem is the writer. He also wrote Child of Light, which is an awesome role-playing game. He wrote Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and before that, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. He's still at Ubisoft. And I feel like this game was kind of treated a little bit harshly by some critics, not only because of the white savior stuff, which I think you can interpret in this game. I don't think that's the intent, but there is that shade there. But moreover, that it just, I don't think enough people played it or even gave credit to the fact that maybe there's something more here than just the dude bros, their hot girlfriends, the violent pirates and smugglers and all of that. So talk to me a little bit about what you liked, what you didn't like about the story, the characters, and all of this.
Yeah, so, what's really cool about this, Kyle, is, again, the story is eventually pieced together as you go, via dialogue, via exposition with characters and various flashbacks. So you learn more as you go. And, again, the whole affair just becomes more substantive with additional background and perspective and backstory. But as the game begins, it's 3 brothers and their friends sort of partying on a tropical island. There's little clues, and again, you talk about the writing and how it's undercredited. There's little things that are annoying in the beginning, like the one character, I don't know if it's Keith or Oliver. There's like one quote in the intro of the game. He's like, as they're dancing on the dance floor in a nightclub, he's like, "To my dad's they're toasting, and he's like, "To my dad's black card, to my black card." It's like all these things are like, oh no, like the douchey Californian rich kids type of thing. But then as like that one little clue was like, these kids are really rich kids, first of all. And I think there's a whole theme of the characters sort of, it's sort of a growing up tale a little bit, a coming of age type of thing. But there's little clues like that where, not to get ahead of ourselves, but the kids basically end up skydiving, and this is all in the intro of the game. They end up skydiving down to this island. You're not sure why or where they are exactly, but they end up doing this skydiving thing, and they're partying, and the skydiving thing goes awry. They sort of miss their target, and they're kidnapped by pirates in this seemingly hostile place. But they're on vacation, but you're not really sure what went wrong. It's like, where did these guys go up? But later on you find out all this stuff. All these questions are answered. So the kids end up getting, kidnapped by pirates, and then in the beginning of the game, I thought you were gonna play you play as Jason and Grant his older brother, our protagonist's older brother in the beginning of the game. And I'm thinking, now we find out a little bit about Grant, the older brother. He's an ex-army, he's ex-military. They're obviously American kids from California. And he could handle himself a little bit. So he escapes from this pirate. We meet our villain. We meet our main villain, Voss, who's this pirate who we have to say is played by Michael Mando, who steals the show. Anybody who knows this game knows that this character just really runs away with it. I think, really, I would argue he's the hook until at least the first third of the game and why you keep playing and why you want to see more. Now, eventually the game opens up to a lot more. There's a lot more value there. But I think he's the early hook, the character of Voss. Michael Mando, it's cool for me, Kyle, because I watch Better Call Saul.
Right.
And Michael Mando plays a character in Better Call Saul named Nacho Varga, who's a main character, a very interesting character, a bad guy, but not really a bad guy. I won't ruin Better Call Saul for people, but Michael Mando is very good in that role of Nacho in the show. And it was so cool for me to go back now 7 or 8 years earlier and see him as Voss in this game, because season 5 of Better Call Saul just finished. I think season 6, which will be the final season of the series, will premiere in 2021. And Michael Mando, man, I mean, again, just the way he acts, the way they employed, that Ubisoft Montreal employed the mocap, and Michael Mando's acting choices and just his passion and that true insanity and lunacy coming through. And again, like, even the little nuances to his acting that they managed to capture in the cutscenes especially, he's just a really, really captivating villain. You want to learn more about this guy. He's obviously unhinged, but he also speaks with, he's also somewhat eloquent and articulate. He has a lot to say. He has very definite ideas. He's violent. He's obviously got some kind of head wound. Aesthetically, you can see this kind of head wound, this massive scar on his cranium. So he's really interesting, and we meet him early on. And then Jason and Grant escape from their cage, from their bamboo cage, and your adventure begins. And again, those little storytelling beats. There's a moment in the beginning of the game that you may remember, Kyle, as Jason and Grant are sort of trying to make their way, sneak their way out of this pirate compound. And you're learning the mechanics of the game. You're learning how to throw rocks. Before you have any weapons, you're learning how to throw rocks to distract the pirates and sort of make your way through this outpost. And there's a room you stumble in, and you realize that the kidnappers have this room filled with luggage and suitcases. It's a room full of it, and you're like, wow, this is some kind of like kidnapping / human trafficking thing. So these kids' vacation, where they're dancing and doing drugs and chilling with girls and all this kind of stuff, has just went from heaven to hell in a heartbeat. And this pirate operation is this long-standing thing. They've captured all these people. This has been a thing here for a long time, obviously. It's one of those chilling little details right in the beginning of the game. You're 5 minutes in, where it's like, wow, okay, this game, there's something more to all this. And what ends up happening is, I'm thinking that you're going to play as the Grant character. Now, spoiler alert, you guys have to, this is the type of game to go play, because there are the story and what happens and the different events are really important. It really is a key thing. It's not just an action shoot 'em up where the story is a afterthought. You really want to go into this game and be surprised by it and go along for the ride. So it turns out that Grant is killed by Voss, the head, seemingly the head pirate at that point. And it's in Jason's hands. Now, Jason is the middle brother. And it's sort of intimated that he doesn't know how to handle himself. He tells his brother, like, I don't know what to do. I never shot a gun. I never had a fight. I never killed a man. So now with Grant dead, you basically run into the jungle and your adventure begins. It's like this young kid who doesn't know how to handle himself, this young Santa Monica kid, is thrust in to this live or die situation, and he has to survive. He has to find his friends, and he has to exact revenge on his brother's killer. And he's kind of brought into this world of drug trafficking and human trafficking and bad guys and basically a drug cartel, and there's CIA involvement. And the first guy you meet that Jason meets along his way is this guy Dennis, who's part of this island, this archipelago island native, I guess, tribe, the Rakiat, who's, I guess, a Rakiat warrior or a member of this tribe. Who Dennis is sort of your initial, you meet him, you're sort of injured and he brings you back to health, and he basically is your guide as you begin to find your way to find your friends, exact revenge for your brother, and maybe there's some other thing going on here where the character of Dennis is using you to exact his own vengeance or sort of play out his own wishes on this native pirate tribe. And it's just about this character, this young Californian kid, a rich kid, having to go out and handle himself and take matters into his own hands in the most extreme way one could possibly think of. And again, just his whole journey throughout the game. I think the game is buoyed by a lot of great side characters, especially the antagonists. I think they're really strong. They just happen to be really strong, whether you're talking about Voss, or later it turns out Voss's boss, Hoyt, or a character who's sort of a mercenary type like Buck. And then later on you meet your friend Sam, who helps you. So there's a lot of characters that help buoy it, but the main protagonist sort of becomes more... It's interesting. It's really interesting and layered because he kind of becomes a more likable and relatable character, your playable character of Jason. But at the same time, sort of what he's up against and what he has to do and what he's witnessing having a real effect on him, having a real emotional and psychological effect on him, much to the chagrin of each one of his friends that he's rescuing along the way. And just sort of how he's kind of slowly becoming a monster. He's slowly becoming unhinged by what he has to do and what he's witnessing, and I guess also sort of being enveloped by his vengeance and sort of being enveloped by that demon and what he sort of is becoming. But then also, just again, to factor in at the same time, you're sort of, as a player, being brought along in that way too, because it's kind of fun. You know, it's kind of fun to exact revenge on these pirates and, like, enter a pirate outpost and murder everybody and liberate outpost by outpost and slay all these pirates, and even getting into maybe a little sadism with killing the animals, even though you're murdering the animals in order to craft, in order to get yourself items, in order to be able to carry more items, so on and so forth, with the whole system of the game, that whole mechanic. But it's a little sadistic. Like, you kind of want to go and shoot the turtle. It's kind of fucked up. And you're kind of becoming, right? And it's you're kind of becoming
definitely.
Jason in the game. And that, the game is sort of telling you that the violence is fun. And that's sort of what's happening to Jason. What's happening to your protagonist is sort of happening to you at the same time. And it's really interesting, especially for someone like me who doesn't... I kind of abhor violence. I don't really like it. I'm kind of squeamish. I don't like to see people hurt, even in a fantasy environment. And not in a cheesy way, not in a bleeding heart way. It's just, that just speaks to who I am as a person. I know a lot of people are like that. So, but a game like this, I have to say, like, I kind of was having fun. And you're trying to justify every action. It's like, I'm sorry, Bear, I have to kill you. Like, I need a larger rucksack. What can I tell you? You know, it's like... You're trying to justify it's like, I need a bigger ammo pouch, so I have to kill these Komodo dragons. I'm sorry, dude. Like, I know you're just like an inhabitant of the island, but you have to go, you know? So that was a lot of fun for me, and sort of gets you a little introspective, because you're like, wow, this probably I shouldn't be having as much fun doing this. And I think games in general, especially today, sort of have that effect. But I think this game was designed to really have that effect and really examine the psyche of the player. And I kind of dig, not in a heavy way, because it's, and again, drawing that line and sort of towing that line between that heaviness and just having fun and just really having a good time and it being entertaining. And maybe it plays out that way because in the end, at least for myself, I could say that you know it's a mission of revenge, that you didn't ask for this. So the pirates sort of, you're kind of justifying it in such a way as like, well, the Voss and the pirates and Hoyt, they brought it down upon themselves. What's happening? They killed my brother. My other friends are missing. It's very deep into the game where you realize that your younger brother Riley isn't dead. Spoiler alert. So he's alive. And you're there, again, you're there on the island on this vacation to celebrate Riley getting his pilot's license. So he's kind of the center of the whole thing because you're there to celebrate his, at least they're telling themselves they're there to celebrate Riley's pilot license. But again, it's like, the way, also another thing, Kyle, with this game is that the payoffs, those moments, those set pieces, or those dramatic bits of action with the characters, face-offs with the various antagonists, those payoffs are stepped out so strategically and so well. They really, really string you along in the game and want you to get to the next thing. And hey, if you get too stressed out, you could journey off and side quest or do a little fetch quest type of thing. So again, I think I agree with you, and I feel like this game just has everything. And again, I say that from a vantage point of someone who knows much less about more contemporary games. But for me, really, I have to say, like, this game really did feel like the.
Sorry, I have this like video auto playing when I'm trying to go to IMDb.
Oh, that's weird. But yeah,
Sorry,
so you know, again, just really, just those fun. It just was kind of fun from A to Z. I really didn't have any real problems with this game. Now, of course, you're talking about a game it's 8 years old. This game came out, a full year before PlayStation 4 came out. So you're talking about a game that's aging. I think it holds up. But, of course, graphically, there are many better games. There's a lot deeper games, all that kind of stuff. But I think this game, I would put this game up there with any must-play, especially for its generation. It was just super. There were so many different fun things, and not even talking about other things like the camera mechanic, which I haven't seen employed in a game where kind of you could identify the various enemy types and the specific dangers that lie ahead. I thought that was really cool. I thought that was a really interesting and clever mechanic, and something else that you could employ that you didn't necessarily have to employ, but it deepens the game. And of course, we'll get into talking about the skills, which I think was a really interesting, clever thing to kind of another thing that seemed to be, Colin may know more about this, but really seemed to me that to enhance your experience with the game by sort of catering the gameplay towards those abilities and towards those mechanics that you personally enjoy most. You know, are you a more stealth-centric player that wants to go in on the sly? Or do you want that over-the-top action where you're just going in, hurling Molotov cocktails with and just jump right into the melee, like jump right into the scrap? Do you want to do more with the hunting and sort of protect yourself against wild animals, protect yourself against crashing in a vehicle, protect yourself against explosives, fire? So the way you could kind of cater your experience, I thought I could see going in and playing this game again and enjoying it just as much, if not more, the second time around, because now you know what you enjoy, you know what lies ahead, and you could kind of cater your game playing experience accordingly, especially with this, not only with the weapons, which there's a wide variety of weapons, but especially with those skills, which I thought was a really cool thing in the game, which I really, really got a kick out of.
Tired of crowded grocery stores? Thrive Market is here for you, offering everything from healthy snacks to organic wine. Thrive Market brings you food as it should be, real ingredients, environmentally friendly, and delicious. Thrive wants to make healthy living easy for you, so they're offering a free trial and 25% off your first order by going to bit.ly/SaveOnThrive. That's bit.ly/SaveOnThrive.
I want to talk a little bit more about Jason Brody. And we have a question here or an inquiry from Tyler J. Sampson, who wrote into us on Patreon. He says, well, I'm sure most people will remember Voss, and we'll obviously talk about him more, and how great of a character he was. I think what stood out most to me was Jason's journey from a prissy rich kid with no real backbone to a psychopathic killer who seems to enjoy the rush of killing people and surviving these near-death experiences. I felt they did a fantastic job building his character growth over the story and even using gameplay elements to show that, like how he begins to scream when shooting the big machine gun for an extended period of time. What do you guys think about his devolution into insanity? And did you end up staying on the island, or did you decide to go home? So we can talk a little bit about the way the game ends as well. But I'll say it's interesting because Jason's evolution and then devolution and then back, I think that there's more of a V shape with it. Now, it can go back down, so maybe it becomes like a squiggly line depending on the ending you choose. But what I like about Jason's character and why I think he might be a little bit of an underrated protagonist and a little bit more than his dude bro background and his surroundings, surrounding characters and cast suggests, is that he does fall down this psychopathic bloodlust path based on his interactions, specifically with the Rakyat natives and whatever the case might be, and Dennis specifically, and Citra specifically, and what's going on in the island, and the help that he kind of employs to assist them in a pretty serious and dire situation that, like you said, environmentally, at least through the environmental storytelling we can tell, has been going on for some time. But he then becomes at some point aware of what he's doing. And so there's a little bit more depth there than I think just, as Tyler says, the prissy rich kid who then becomes the psychopath. I think that he kind of bails out of it, and depending on, and I'll be curious, Dig, about what ending you chose, depending on the ending you choose, he kind of completely gets out of it. While I think Lisa was the one that was his girlfriend, he kind of abandons them for the island. He kind of like does have this heart of darkness situation almost. That might be a little bit of an improper.
I like that.
Yeah, but like where like Apocalypse Now, you know, where
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, I guess that does make sense because Apocalypse Now is so deeply influenced by Heart of Darkness, but I look at his situation and I'm like, yeah, there's something to this, because he finds himself easily swayed by the pretty girl, by the compelling adventure, by the tattoos, and the strength that he's finding because he's so incompetent compared to his brother, his older brother that's killed, and his younger brother is even more helpless than him. He's, I guess, in the middle, but then kind of crawls out of it. But what kind of, or rather, what ending did you end up choosing? Did you save your friends, or did you abandon them when given the choice?
You know what? It's funny, Kyle, because for me, this game, maybe more than any other that we've played for the show, it's funny because this was the ultimate. We get this a lot in TVs and movies and the games that we play, but this was like the ultimate put yourself in their place game for me. It was like I constantly imagine. It just has that resonance. Like, what would you do in these kids' place? What would you do in Jason's place? It's a horrific situation that he's thrust into, and he's completely unprepared for it. And the game sort of smacked of that for me through the entire experience. I found myself constantly doing this. Wow, what would I do in this situation? What would I do if I had this mounted machine gun on the back of the Jeep? Would I run? Actually just run, or would I actually engage in combat with these, this half a dozen pirates? I had that throughout the game, and I think that's what kind of strung me along with it. And you guys are right. It does really go beyond just a coming of age story. It goes way past that, because it goes from being unprepared to maybe becoming just completely overcome by the opposite, a monster. I read a review that said it very well, that this was a tale of a beta becoming an alpha, and I really like that. But I think it goes way past that, because what comes after the alpha is like the monster. And I think Jason becoming that, it's funny because it was part necessary, I think, in order to sort of avenge your family, and also maybe just bring justice down on bad guys, right? Maybe in a superhero type of semblance. But also, I think it goes even past that, because I felt myself not, when I saw Jason becoming that monster and sort of relishing the killing and enjoying the murder and sort of becoming unhinged, and it's intimated later on that he and Voss are like the same person, two sides of the same coin, whatever it was. I was repelled by that idea, because I think I just wanted Jason to come out of that. I didn't want to see it end badly for him. I didn't want to see him enveloped by the darkness. So for me, it was an easy ending. When I was given that choice, I chose to save my friends. I didn't have the heart, although it's an extreme curiosity, to choose Citra and join her. I had to save my friends. I mean, for me, it was a gimme. Especially because I just wanted to see it go well. Again, it's like, wow, these douchey rich kids. It's like, now I want to see it go well. Especially for Jason, after everything he's been through, everything he's been tossed into, all the horrors that he's seen, all that human on human atrocity that he's gone through, the murdering, the drugs, the backstabbing, the kidnapping, everything. There's raping in this. I mean, it's hinted at, but I want to talk to you about this later on with one of the characters. It's pretty horrific what these kids go through. I mean, talk about PTSD, right? So for me, when you're given that choice at the end, it was a no-brainer. I had to save my friends. Now, what about for you, Kyle? Because you and I talked about this on text a little bit, but I didn't ask you what you chose at the end for the first time you played, and even for the second time.
Yeah, so both times I chose, and I didn't remember what I chose the first time until I chose it the second time, and then it crystallized. I was like, I chose the same thing twice. I really like playing, if given the option, I like being a good guy. I have a hard time being a bad guy in a game unless that's really what the game's about, and that's what it's forcing you to do, and that's obviously encapsulated, and we're going to play this game soon and do a knockback on it based on a vote, but Mass Effect is all about the Paragon path and the Renegade path, as people well know. And there's an actual morality system in that game which doesn't exist in Far Cry 3. I'm glad that it doesn't exist in Far Cry 3 because it does start to make you, or force you to look at things through two very specific lenses. But what I like about the ending is that, and the choice is that there are no other choices in the game. So it's not something you're prepared for. When the button prompts come up and it tells you to choose, you're like, I remember being like, I didn't expect this at all. Right. In fact, I actually, when I was playing it, it's been 7.5 years when I was playing it on PS4, because I beat it I think in December or January of either 2012 or 2013 into that transition of the year, and I got the platinum trophy in it, so I was really into the game. And this time around, when I was playing it, and you have that escape from the airport where Riley is piloting the helicopter and figuring out the helicopter controls and stuff, I'm like, because I remember that whole combat scene and finding him tied up in the building and stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is the end of the game when you're flying away. And then I was like, it's not the end of the game. You go to the temple and meet up with Citra and then have this choice, which I totally forgot about. And you had reminded me that there were two endings, so I don't know what I was anticipating, but I chose the good ending because that's just kind of the way I like to play a game. And to the Mass Effect point, someone at BioWare had recently, who were the developers that made Mass Effect, had recently said that something like only 9% of people played as a Renegade, and you have a total choice to play as a Paragon or Renegade in that game. Those were what are the two paths are called, good and bad. And so that just goes to show you, it's kind of nice to hear that, because even though they put all this work into the bad path, it's kind of nice to know that most people do go towards the good path. But I couldn't find any statistics that Ubisoft ever released about who chose what, because they can easily see that in their own back end if you're connected to the PSN or Xbox Live. But the bad ending is interesting, or the other ending when you go with Citra is interesting, because you end up dying. So
yeah,
so you live. Dennis is actually killed, or no, Dennis kills Citra.
Yeah.
When he tries to kill you, but in the other one, Citra kills you. So it's one of those almost Fallout New Vegas type gray area choices, where you do the bad thing, you think you're being the bad guy, but you end up losing everything. And so it felt good to cut your friends down, their ropes and stuff like that, and get out of there. But that's the choice the choice I made personally. So
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear it.
Now let's talk a little bit about, we have to talk about Voss. And Jake the Jerk wrote into us on Patreon and said, "Greetings, gentlemen. Do you know the definition of insanity? Far Cry 3 is my favorite game in the series. Great open world, great story, and easily one of the best villains in the game, in any game, Voss." I agree. Voss is incredibly memorable. And people that were playing games, which I'm sure most of you were at the time, will remember that when this game was revealed at E3 2011, at Ubisoft's press conference, that Voss was the main component of those reveals. It was as I remember, it was the trailer or the part of the game where he's throwing you into the watering hole with the cinder block tied around your leg.
Sure, of course.
And he's messing with you in that whole insanity thing or whatever. And I remember people being really tied into this character. And if you read about the production of this game, so this game actually enters pre-production and production in 2008, but Ubisoft loses a ton of its talent, high-end or its leadership talent, between 2008 and 2010 at Ubisoft Montreal. Some of them go to Relic and other places, Infinity Ward, I think. And so the game is partially rebooted in 2010, and one of the things that they dealt with the most is how they deal with the character of Voss. And Voss didn't exist at first. They had other enemy type characters. I think one of them was named Bull or something like that. And they finally, with Michael Mondo, found this amazing performance. And like you said, the motion capture, you're not really into motion capture. I like it more in games where it really matters. And I think it matters in a game like this because you can see their faces emoting and stuff. And it really does hold up really well. I don't know if it's because the Fallout or the PlayStation 4 version is slightly up-resed. I think it still has a locked frame rate and all of that, but maybe the game looks better on PS. I'm sure it does look better on PS4 than PS3, so maybe it doesn't hold up as well as I think, but the performance is really quite spectacular. And the only question we have about this then is from Anthony J. Sanchez, who I think gets into something really interesting, and he says, hey, C&D, man, this game was awesome and addictive, especially the crazy antagonist, at least until halfway through the game. It was kind of a shame that they killed off Voss Montenegro so early. Did it bother you guys that they killed him off so early? Warm thoughts from sunny Florida. Thank you for writing in, Anthony, with that. So what do you think about this character, Voss? We talked a little bit about his great performance. Obviously, you're familiar with the actor from Better Call Saul. But is it a shame that they killed him off so early, that you find out, maybe not surprisingly, that he's working for someone else in the form of Hoyt, who's also really well acted? But I'm curious what you think about... Because I see some criticisms of him, which I think is true. It actually reminds me a little bit of... We just did Austin Powers a few weeks ago with Scott Evil, where he's making fun of Dr. Evil for just not killing Austin Powers.
Yes.
He's like, I'll go into my bedroom and I'll just get the gun and we'll kill him together. Which is really funny. And I've seen some criticisms of that where like Voss is just toying with this dude. Like, why not just kill him? He lets him escape after killing his brother and then he like throws him into the watering hole with the cinder block. And it's like, you could just kill him. So there is an interesting criticism to be had there. But what do you think about this character? What do you think about his performance? What do you think about his motivation? And what do you think about him basically dying about halfway through the game?